It's common for mothers. We worry about our kids because we love them, and we hope our worry keeps them safe and happy. But parenting out of fear may hurt more than it helps. My next guest claims that when we parent with fear, we often make decisions that go against our values, and it can negatively impact our children in the long run. Heather joins me with more information on this. So, parenting out of fear, tell me what that looks like to you.
So this is going to be when we feel really anxious, and so we make our decisions based off of that anxiety, which anxiety in and of itself is being afraid of what could happen in the future that I'm not going to be able to control. It could be when we make our parenting decisions because we're afraid of failure, or afraid that someone's going to get hurt, that we're afraid we're not going to be enough, we're afraid that our children are going to make poor choices. There's a lot of fear wrapped up in that, and so when we're making our decisions from that place of fear, we tend to make decisions that in the long run we're uncomfortable with, that don't tend to line up with the type of parents or the things we want our children to learn. Right?
And so I think, like we mentioned, all of us as moms, grandmas, we worry. So how do we gauge ourselves? Like, are we one of those people who is parenting out of fear?
Yeah, oftentimes parenting out of fear means we're really overprotective and we try to control everything.
Okay.
Right? If you also find yourself saying no all the time about everything, there's probably a space of fear there or anxiety. But really, we become really overprotective. We see everything as a threat. And so we try to mitigate that threat all the time. And so we try to control everything. And again, that manifests itself just that way. We kind of clamp down. We don't allow them the freedom. We don't find ourselves saying, go give it a try, or sure, explore it. That doesn't tend to come out of our mouths if we're parenting from a place of fear.
I think I grew out of that a little bit as I had been a parent for a longer time, but maybe newer parents, this might be more common. But tell us why that is bad for our kids.
Well, and right before we go there, it's a big shift, right? Because I think you're right. I think when kids are smaller, we look at things we're afraid of more as they're going to get hurt. But then as kids get older, you know, they call and say, can I take a road trip? And immediately we go to, I'm afraid you're going to get in a car accident, or you're going to get, again, hurt in some way. Or we're afraid of big decisions that they might miss making. Or we send them to college and we're afraid they're not going to get out of bed and study every day and get good grades. Yeah. So the fear shifts for us. And the problem with this, again, is that it puts our kids in positions where they're unable to make their own decisions. And one of the reasons why this happens is because when we get really overprotective and controlling, it means they don't have to make their own choices. And when they don't make their own choices, they never learn what consequences look like. So they're unable to put those two things together. They're unable to say, I made this choice and this was an uncomfortable consequence or a comfortable one. So we hinder their ability to do that.
Okay.
We also put them in positions where it's really challenging for them to adapt, for them to grow, but to face anywhere they need to make adaptations in situations, they haven't had to. We've controlled everything. So if something goes crazy or gets uncomfortable, we immediately step in and take care of it because we're afraid of what could happen. So they don't learn how to adapt. They don't learn how to change those things.
And you also said they have a hard time handling criticism.
They do. They have a really hard time handling criticism because they've never been in positions where they need to hear it. Remember, if something gets uncomfortable, we step in and control it. So then as they get older and a boss or someone at school or someone in their community says, hey, here's somewhere you could improve, they get really defensive and they start to blame. So again, none of us set out to raise kids who are defensive and blame everyone. But when we parent from fear, those tend to be more likely the outcomes than their ability to understand consequences or to make decisions. And then we find ourselves in a position where kids who are controlled too tightly tend to rebel.
Yeah.
That tends to be the choices that they make. It kind of reminds me of if you've ever seen a small child who gets a puppy and just squeezes that puppy so tight until eventually the puppy has to kind of lash out a little bit because it needs some space. That's what that rebellion feels like they've been trapped in a corner for a really long time.
A little bit too much.
So they eventually need to spread their wings. Yeah.
So you have some advice for us because I think when we go through those things, we can all probably see a little bit of ourselves in at least one of those things. I sure can. So let's talk about what we do so that we don't parent out of fear. And you said the first one is we can use that fear to our advantage.
We can learn from it. So here's how it kind of works in our bodies and our minds. We tend to feel anxious first about something. If you feel anxious, it's most likely rooted in something you're afraid of, right? And again, we are quick to think that fear just means, well, I'm afraid you're going to get hurt. But it could be a fear that we're going to get judged, a fear that we're not good enough,
rejected,
a fear that we're going to get rejected. These are all spaces of fear that we're describing. So what we want to do is we want to use those feelings to our advantage. They provide information. So when we feel fear or that anxiousness as parents, we want to take a step back and ask, Where's this coming from? And use the information to make different decisions, moving forward. So fear can give us and provide us information. We can use that. We can utilize that.
Okay, that's our first step, it sounds like. Next, you say recognize excuses. From us or from our kids?
From us, because we make lots of excuses so that we don't have to deal with what we're afraid of, right? So for example, I had a client recently whose son asked if all of his friends could come over on a Saturday and spend the day at his home. And she immediately had a lot of excuses as to why it was not going to work. I have a lot going on. We had some other things we wanted to do as a family, a lot of those excuses, only to realize that she was afraid that she wasn't going to be a fun enough mom or have a cool enough house for all of these friends to come over and play in. Right? That's the fear. And so there was all of these excuses to try and tell her son why it wasn't going to work, when really she was just afraid that she was going to be judged and that she wasn't enough. And again, that they weren't going to have fun, and that was going to be a reflection on her. That's a space of fear. That's an everyday fear that parents are facing. And so then we make excuses.
Okay, so recognize when we're doing that.
We do.
And then you say from that we can adopt a growth mindset.
So growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset means that wherever we're at right now, it can't be changed. We can't learn anything new, and we can't do it any different. A growth mindset is that mindset that we can learn and grow no matter where we're at, that we can improve in lots of ways. We want to adopt that mindset so that when we feel that fear, when we're making those things about us that we're afraid of, we can take a step back and say, all right, I can make mistakes, I'm not going to be perfect, and I can learn. And I can try again next time. And I can figure out how to communicate this differently. We want that growth mindset that there's room to do different or grow.
And what a great example for your kids to show that you can do that, they can do it too.
Absolutely, because we tend to raise, right, kids who function from fear if we parent them from a space of fear.
Yeah.
We're not trying to raise kids who are afraid of, again, the anxiety or not being enough or fear of failure. And so we want to model that for them.
I love that. You say learn from the pain.
Because parenting is painful.
It can be, for sure.
It can be really painful. It's painful to realize where we've misstepped. It's painful to watch our kids make decisions that we know full well are not going to benefit them in the long run. And then it's painful to have to help them negotiate those choices that weren't great, just like it is in our own lives. There's a lot of loss that can come through parenting, even just in different stages. Sometimes it's just painful to watch them leave your home and realize that your role and relationship with them has shifted.
Yeah.
So we want to take that pain, and again, we want to learn from it. We want to embrace it. We have to do that by recognizing that things being hard, that's part of parenting. And when we can accept that, then we don't have to be afraid of it. It really is having like a monster under your bed and then flipping on the light and looking under your bed and going, oh, okay, there's no monster under there, and accepting the fact that it's a part of how we do these things.
Yeah.
We want to be sure that we're doing that.
I'm like, check and next.
Yes.
Let's move on. Okay,
Yes.
and then last, remember what we know.
So we tend to think that the way we work through fear is by reminding ourselves about what we're not afraid of. And what we're not afraid of doesn't take care of fear. What we know takes care of fear. So when you're feeling fearful, when you're afraid of failing or being judged or not being enough as a parent, we want to revert back to narratives that help remind us those things that we know to be true. So for example, instead of I'm afraid I'm not going to be good enough, to remind ourselves that we're trying every day. That's actually something I know about myself. I know that every single day I'm putting energy into my family. What I know helps to combat the fear. And so reminding ourselves every day of the things that we know, opposed to the things that we're afraid of, it helps eradicate that fear. And then we're not paralyzed, because fear brings paralysis, which is the exact opposite of how we want to parent. We don't want to be paralyzed.
I love that. And just wrapping it all up, just being that example for them. I think that that's the whole thing. Because again, we don't want kids who are living in fear, so we can't do it ourselves.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Thanks, Heather. All right, Heather, you can contact her for counseling, and you can find all of her information on our website.